At 56, Michael Schumacher finally reveals the 5 drivers he hated most. The world remembers the silence, not the roar of the V10 engines, not the red Ferrari crossing the line, but the quiet that followed a career built on absolute domination. Michael Schumacher was not just a champion. He was a force that bent Formula One to his will. 7 titles, 91 victories, records that once felt untouchable. But behind the precision, behind the icy visor and calculated brilliance, and there was another story the paddock rarely spoke about. Because greatness in Formula One does not come without conflict. Schumacher didn't just beat his rivals, he broke them, intimidated them, and sometimes crossed lines that others feared to approach. Friendships were sacrificed. Respect was conditional. And on more than one occasion, rivalry turned into something far more personal. For years, these tensions stayed buried beneath champagne celebrations and corporate smiles. But those who raced against him knew the truth. Michael Schumacher never forgot an enemy. Who Schumacher really was. Michael Schumacher was not the villain many painted him to be, but he was never the hero they wanted either. He was a perfectionist to the point of obsession, a driver who treated every lap in practice as if it were the final lap of a championship decider. Engineers spoke of midnight debriefs that lasted until sunrise. The teammates learned quickly that equality inside the garage was a myth. Everything revolved around winning, and winning meant Schumacher. He didn't believe in leaving space on track, and he didn't believe in psychological mercy off it. Where others saw sport, he saw war conducted at 300 kilometers per hour. Every weakness was studied. Every rival was categorized, useful, irrelevant, or dangerous. This ruthless clarity is what built the Ferrari dynasty. But it also created a long list of drivers who didn't just lose to Schumacher, they came to resent him. Rivalry philosophy, 120 to 150 words. To understand Michael Schumacher's rivalries, you have to understand his code. He didn't race for popularity, he raced for control. The track, the strategy, even the psychology of his opponents. Everything was part of a larger battlefield. If a move existed, he would use it. If a gray area in the rules appeared, he would live in it. To Schumacher, hesitation was weakness, and kindness was a liability at 300 kilometers per hour. He believed respect was earned through submission. If a driver backed out of a corner, they were no longer a threat. If they fought back, they were marked, studied, pressured, and pushed to their limits until they either broke or adapted. This philosophy created legends and controversy in equal measure. Because for Michael Schumacher, rivalry was never just about beating someone on Sunday. It was about making sure they never believed they could beat him again. Driver number 5, Jacques Villeneuve. If there was one rival who refused to be intimidated, it was Jacques Villeneuve. He arrived in Formula One with the confidence of a world champion and the calm defiance of someone who did not believe in Schumacher's psychological warfare. While others yielded in wheel-to-wheel combat, Villeneuve held his line. And that, more than anything, irritated Schumacher. Their rivalry reached its breaking point in 1997 at Jerez. The championship hung in the balance, Ferrari versus Williams, precision versus patience. Schumacher had built his season on relentless consistency, but Villeneuve had clawed his way back, refusing to crack under pressure. When the decisive moment came, Schumacher did what he had done before. He turned in aggressively, a move designed not just to defend, but to end the fight entirely. But this time, the outcome was different. Villeneuve didn't disappear. He absorbed the contact, kept his car alive, and continued toward the title while Schumacher spun into the gravel. It was a defining image. The hunter stranded, the target escaping. The aftermath cut deeper than the lost championship. Schumacher was disqualified from the entire season, a punishment that questioned not his speed, but his judgment. Villeneuve, meanwhile, it became the symbol of resistance, the driver who had looked Schumacher in the eye and refused to move. From that moment on, the respect between them was purely professional, never personal. Villeneuve had exposed something rare, that Schumacher's intimidation could fail, and for a driver who built his legacy on absolute control, that was an insult he never truly forgot.
Vettel, back-to-back world champion.
Driver number 4, David Coulthard. David Coulthard was never Schumacher's fastest rival, but he was one of the most complicated. Their tension wasn't built on a single championship battle. It was built on moments, misunderstandings, and one incident that Schumacher never fully let go. Spa, 1998. The rain was biblical, visibility almost non-existent, and Schumacher was delivering one of the greatest wet weather drives in Formula One history. He had lapped the field and was charging toward a dominant victory when he caught Coulthard's slower McLaren. What happened next remains one of the most controversial collisions of the era. Schumacher slammed into the back of Coulthard at full speed, ripping a wheel off the Ferrari and ending his race instantly. Furious, he stormed into the McLaren garage, accusing Coulthard of brake testing him in near-zero visibility. Mechanics had to physically hold Schumacher back as he confronted his rival. Coulthard insisted it was a misunderstanding, that he had lifted to let the leader through. But Schumacher never truly accepted that explanation. To him, it was either negligence or something worse. In a sport where trust at high speed is everything, that moment shattered whatever professional comfort existed between them. Even in later years, when both drivers spoke more diplomatically, there was always a trace of distance. Coulthard represented something Schumacher despised: unpredictability. Not a psychological opponent he could dominate, but a variable he could not control. And for a driver whose power came from control, that made Coulthard a permanent irritation in his peripheral vision. Next to 150 to 300, driver number 3, Mika Häkkinen. Mika Häkkinen was the rival Schumacher respected the most, and perhaps the one he found the hardest to break. Because where others reacted to pressure, Häkkinen remained calm. No mind games, no political battles, no emotional outbursts. Just speed, precision, and an almost silent confidence that neutralized Schumacher's usual psychological advantage. Their war defined the late 1990s. Ferrari versus McLaren, red versus silver. Schumacher would push relentlessly, qualifying laps on the absolute edge, race strategies built around forcing mistakes, but Hakkinen rarely made them. And when he did strike, it was clinical. Spa, 2000. One of the greatest overtakes in Formula One history. Hakkinen passed Schumacher around the outside while lapping Riccardo Zonta, a move so bold and perfectly timed that even Schumacher had to acknowledge it. It was a rare moment where the hunter was outmaneuvered, not through aggression, but through pure racing brilliance. That was the difference between them. Schumacher fought with control and intimidation. Häkkinen fought with composure. There was no fear to exploit, no weakness to target. Right, and that forced Schumacher into something uncomfortable, racing on equal psychological terms. They shook hands, they smiled for the cameras, but beneath that professionalism was a rivalry built on mutual obstruction. Häkkinen didn't hate Schumacher, but Schumacher knew that as long as the Finn was on the grid, total domination was impossible, and that was something he could never fully tolerate. Driver number 2, Fernando Alonso. By the mid-2000s, Michael Schumacher was supposed to be untouchable. 5 consecutive titles with Ferrari had turned him into the axis around which Formula One rotated. Then Fernando Alonso arrived, younger, fearless, and completely uninterested in Schumacher's legacy. Alonso didn't grow up fearing Schumacher. He grew up studying how to beat him. Their rivalry in 2005 and 2006 wasn't just about speed. It was about a shift in power. Renault versus Ferrari. Innovation versus empire. Alonso attacked the championship with relentless consistency, forcing Schumacher into something he hadn't experienced in years: desperation. Imola, 2005. Schumacher filled Alonso's mirrors for lap after lap, searching for a mistake that never came. The old psychological pressure didn't work. Alonso defended flawlessly, absorbing everything the 7-time champion could throw at him. Then came Monaco, 2006. Schumacher stopped his car in qualifying at Rascasse, bringing out yellow flags and preventing Alonso from completing a final flying lap. Stewards ruled it deliberate. The penalty sent Schumacher to the back of the grid and ignited one of the most toxic political storms of his career. Alonso didn't just beat Schumacher, he exposed the cracks in the dynasty. For the first time in years, Schumacher was the one reacting instead of dictating. And for a driver whose identity was built on control, Fernando Alonso represented something deeply personal, the future arriving before he was ready to let go. Driver number 1, Damon Hill. More than any other rival, Damon Hill represented unfinished business. Not because he was the fastest, not because he was the most aggressive, but because their rivalry was defined by a single, irreversible moment that split opinion across the entire sport. Adelaide, 1994. The championship decider. Schumacher leading Hill by a single point. One mistake, one brush with the wall, and suddenly the Williams was in his mirrors. Hill saw an opening. Schumacher saw a threat. What followed became one of the most controversial collisions in Formula One history. Schumacher turned in. Both cars were out. The title was his. To some, it was instinct, a champion refusing to surrender. To others, it was calculated, a move that crossed the invisible line between racing and elimination. Hill never accused with theatrics, never launched political attacks, but the tension between them never truly faded. Because while Schumacher celebrated a first world title, Hill carried the weight of a championship he believed was taken, not lost. Even years later, when both spoke with public diplomacy, there was a distance that politeness could not erase. Hill represented the moral question that followed Schumacher throughout his career. How far is too far in the pursuit of victory? And unlike other rivalries built on speed or psychology, this one was built on history, a moment frozen in time that neither driver could ever rewrite. History rarely judges champions only by their victories. It judges them by the shadows those victories cast. Michael Schumacher transformed Formula One into a science of domination, fitness, data, strategy, absolute commitment. Every modern champion stands on foundations he helped build, but greatness at that level is never clean. It leaves scars, broken rivalries, and questions that echo long after the engines fall silent. Some drivers feared him, some resented him. A few forced him to become something even greater. Yet the paradox of Schumacher's career is this: the very ruthlessness that created the legend also created the controversy that follows his name. He didn't want to be loved. He wanted to be unbeatable. And in the end, the paddock never agreed on whether he was the sport's ultimate competitor or its most relentless antagonist. But they all agreed on one thing. When Michael Schumacher was in your mirrors, the race was never just a race.